I gotta say, it's really nice to walk out of an MCU movie without hanging my head low in disappointment. Welcome to the channel. I am Budster Brown, here to offer film casuals and critics a perspective on cinema. Today, reviewing the highly anticipated Deadpool and Wolverine. A little background for me on what I thought of the first two Deadpool movies. I really enjoyed them, Deadpool 2 in particular. However, while I did have a fun time watching those first two Deadpool movies, I can't exactly say that they're my go-to superhero type movie. Still really like them. I always have fun when I do sit down and watch those movies. However, when it comes to Hugh Jackman's interpretation of Wolverine, he is fundamental in my enjoyment of superhero movies. As a kid, I watched a ton of X1, X2, even X3, X-Men Origins Wolverine, The Wolverine. Hugh Jackman's take on the character has always been something that I've connected to, and I know I'm not alone. Millions and millions of comic book fans have gathered around Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. Going into this movie, I knew it wasn't going to be a masterpiece by any means, but I was at least hoping it would be around the same level as the first two Deadpool movies, and I was also really hoping that the movie respected Wolverine's character. He had such a great finale in 2017's Logan, and the thought of them rolling Hugh Jackman out to play the character again so they could turn him into a quip machine in the likes of what they've done to Thor and Ant-Man is just something that haunted my dreams of what if I walk in and he just is like that.
Noob Master, hey, it's Thor again. Listen, buddy, if you don't log off this game immediately, I'm gonna rip off your arms and shove them up your butt.
Other worries I had going into this movie is that the normal creativity that you would come to expect in a Deadpool movie would be smothered out by the studio interference. As we know, the overlords at Disney have a very hands-on approach with their creatives, always tinkering and changing things and throwing in rewrites and having reshoots, and I was worried that sort of stressful production environment could negatively affect this movie. And looking at the trailers, it looked like there was a ton of cameos. The plot looked somewhat chaotic. I didn't know how they were going to fit everything in, and I was just hoping and praying that it wouldn't fall into the very many pitfalls that the MCU has become very accustomed to. And while the movie isn't perfect by any means, I am so happy to say that I had a blast watching Deadpool and Wolverine, and I was extremely satisfied with the end product. But before I ramble on about this movie a little bit more, I would like to hear you guys ramble on about what your favorite Deadpool movie is and what your favorite Wolverine movie is down in the comment section below. Now, this movie's greatest strength, thankfully, is the dynamic between Deadpool and Wolverine, which is really good because the movie is called Deadpool and Wolverine. As I mentioned, one of my biggest fears for this movie is that they would just turn Wolverine into this quippy joke machine, and he is not like that at all. He plays the straight man, the serious man, which can be just as funny when you're paired to someone who is definitely not a straight man in more ways than one. I think the thing that makes Deadpool so funny is that he is this ridiculous character that is constantly breaking the fourth wall, that can never take anything seriously. And while that's funny in its own right, I think it's even funnier when he's paired with serious people, so that foil and contrast is just more distinct. And just having Logan be so annoyed with everything Deadpool does is just a great dynamic. It's so funny. Their relationship, as it grows and blossoms and they eventually grow to respect each other by the end of this movie, is so cathartic, entertaining, and satisfying all at the same time. I was hoping that these two characters interacting with each other was going to be something like this, and it blew past my expectations, which honestly was an answer to my prayers. And focusing a little bit more on Wolverine, it's not just that he's funny when paired with Deadpool. I actually think that they do this character some serious justice. I don't feel this movie hinders Logan's impact, even though everyone was making a big deal at that time that Hugh Jackman was never going to come back. It was his last time as the character, but it still has that element of finality when I think to Logan. I'm not like, oh, this movie ruined it. The way that they bring Wolverine back and even use the film Logan to play into his character arc is actually one of the smartest things that this plot does. You see, the Wolverine we end up getting is one that has failed at life, that is given up, that is not quite the hero that we would know Logan as from the movies that we have seen. And Logan, throughout the course of this movie, learning how to be a hero again, learning how to be an X-Men, is what makes his character arc so compelling. And I'm also just really glad that I got to see Wolverine in the comic book suit. I was always a little bit sad after Logan was over and I thought I was never going to see him again, that I never really got to see a rated R Wolverine that wasn't nerfed, for lack of a better word. Like in the Wolverine, he gets his regeneration powers stolen for the majority of the movie. And then in Logan, he's old and broken down and his regeneration abilities don't work nearly as well as they used to. So seeing a Wolverine whose regeneration is in peak form, rated R action in the comic book suit, I felt like I was finally getting that missing piece that I wish I could have seen from Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, and now I just feel so much more satisfied that he came back. This movie is also really funny. I know I already mentioned Wolverine and Deadpool's interactions with each other being the best part of this movie, but Deadpool makes so many jokes in this movie, and there's so many funny circumstances, and there's so many things that happen that really add to the comedic value. I watched this with a packed theater Thursday opening night. It felt like every 15 seconds or so, someone was laughing. We were all laughing. We were all having a great time. They were making fun of the MCU a whole lot, all of those problems that we've run into with multiverse shenanigans. I would even make a case that this might be the funniest of the Deadpool movies for my sense of humor, though it's pretty close with Deadpool 2 because, as I said, I really like Deadpool 2 and I think that movie is very funny. I also think the action in this movie is well done. They don't pull their punches with the rated R violence. The first action scene that we actually get in this movie that takes place in the snow is by far my favorite because I just think it's really funny and creative, bone-chilling, if you would. You'll know once you see the movie. And it also just felt the most Deadpool-y. Like, this is something that Deadpool would do. But there's other great action scenes. Wolverine and Deadpool have a couple of tuffles throughout the movie that are fun to watch. There's a couple of group action scenes that take place in a sort of limbo area that has some fun cameos in there, and I think that action works really well. There's another one near the end of the movie where there's this sort of panning shot that goes for a long time. However, I do feel like there is a little bit of the impact missing from Deadpool 1 and especially even Deadpool 2 for me. It's still good, and like I said, that first one is super, super well done. It could just be that it's higher budget, and so you're getting a lot more moving pieces at once, and it's more reminiscent of that big blockbuster appeal that you would come to expect from an MCU movie, and I'm used to the more smaller scale, intimate, and also creative levels that are from the first and second Deadpool movie. But maybe I'm tripping. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. And as I mentioned, this movie isn't perfect. I do think that there are a significant number of flaws. Number one being the movie just feels too long. There are a couple of scenes and bits that were dragged out way past its expiration dates where I was like, it's time to get a move on. I also felt like there was a couple of scenes in the movie that could have been removed entirely and would have also improved the pacing. And I think another part of the reason why the pacing feels a little bit longer than usual is that the plot itself is utter nonsense if you stop and think about it for more than a split second. It's almost impossible to not be nonsensical when you're dealing with multiverses that's trying to connect the TVA from Loki. We also have this Deadpool guy that's breaking the fourth wall, and then you have all these villains and random things happening where things feel so unorganized and chaotic, and a lot of it is just led to by stupid decisions made by certain characters. And I mentioned that fight scene with the panning camera near the end where Wade and Wolverine are a unit, but when you stop and think about why that fight scene's happening and its overall place in the plot, you realize that it doesn't really matter to the plot almost at all. And there's a couple of moments like that throughout this movie. And another problem I have is that the villains are incredibly weak. And I would say that there's two. There's the TVA guy named Paradox, who's sort of overseeing this whole operation. And he is just a bumbling buffoon that feels like he should be nowhere near any sort of management. Not even a McDonald's should allow this guy to run their store. He'd burn it to the ground. He just seems so incompetent to the point where my suspension of disbelief that this guy made it high up was just completely shattered. And even for a Deadpool movie, it was just so absurd. The other villain I'll just keep to myself because I don't know if it's really a spoiler for comic book fans out there, but essentially she's a really powerful mutant and she's just so boring, uninteresting, just generic and stereotypical. And they do some cool things with her powers at times that the horror movie fan in me really liked. But other than that, it was just an obstacle for Deadpool and Wolverine to overcome. And it's a shame because I actually thought Deadpool 2 really upped the ante with the villains, and I think it did that much better. This next and last issue I'm going to mention is a bit of a mixed bag for me. That is all of the cameos that they have. On one hand, I like a lot of them, and it's fun to see certain cameos from the 20th Century Fox superhero movies, and I won't spoil which ones those are. Seeing some of those there and X-Men cameos as well is just fun for me. On the other hand, it can be distracting, it can be a little bit annoying, and it can just feel a little bit shoehorned in and forced. But at the same time, the movie is also making fun of how the MCU has been relying so heavily on cameos in the first place. And so it's a little bit of a meta commentary, and Deadpool says as much many times throughout the movie. On one hand, it's kind of smart, but it's also you're doing the same thing that a lot of these Marvel movies have been doing that have been causing a little bit of fatigue for me. And so by proxy, I was fatigued by some of the multiverse shenanigans that they were doing. However, I think the best element of this for me is that it feels like a proper send-off to a lot of these Fox superhero ran properties. I think something that was just so sad for me with how the X-Men franchise went out is when Disney bought Fox, the last movie that we got was New Mutants, which was a movie that I'm a little bit of an apologist for. However, it just didn't feel right to end off the X-Men franchise like that before the MCU does whatever they're going to do with the X-Men. Going into this movie, it felt like one of the missions that they had was to show a lot of love towards those X-Men movies, and not just the X-Men movies, but a lot of the Fox superhero movies, and pay love to the ones that aren't that good, pay love to the ones that are good, and make fun of them, but not in a spiteful way, but in a loving way. I loved so many of those movies growing up, and I really appreciated that extra touch that made me feel very nostalgic, but in the best way possible. Is this movie not paced very well? Yes. Does this movie have a nonsensical plot? Yes. Does this movie have way too many cameos? Potentially, but at the end of the day, if you just turn your brain off and take the movie at face value for what it's trying to do, the love it's showing to these characters, to this universe, and just allow yourself to enjoy the spectacle, laugh at the jokes, and take the movie for what it is and not what it could be, I can guarantee you will have a great time and you won't regret watching Deadpool and Wolverine, which is why I am going to give this movie a B rank.
Too easy. Piece of cake.
And hey, you made it to the end of the video. Please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I am a very small channel trying to grow. Right over here, you're gonna have my ranking of every X-Men movie, including Deadpool 1, 2, and 3. And down here is my season 1 breakdown of X-Men 97 that I did on my podcast. With that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you later.